Hello my Gunrunners, welcome back to AYYKAYY Reacts. To anyone that's new, welcome to the channel. I'm AK, an ex-conscript of Iran, self-proclaimed political dumbass, but it didn't stop my mouth from working. Also a freelance translator and interpreter. You know, being an Iranian, it comes with a lot of perks, not really that many, but does. Anywhere in any game, when I am somehow asked the question where you are from, as soon as I write down my country, the usual line after that is either a racist joke, which fine, comedy is subjective, I ran and I run joke, or the phrase I'm sorry, which kind of fair. You get used to all of that. It has really good people, very good cuisine, lots of different places to see, really good weather, but also comes with some cons. One of which is asking yourself the unavoidable question, what if the Islamic Revolution never happened? And to my supreme leader's credit, even the sanctions could not stop us from exporting this question to every other country near us. For you, my dear gunrunners, I might look like I want to just rant at dumb history stuff, but sadly for me, my view is that we are living in the most dumbest timeline we could possibly ever have. So as always, I'm gonna be talking about all the stupid stuff that happened, and in the meantime, ripping my entire country a new one. But before we start, as always, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that. All the links of this video is gonna be down in the description right below, or you can see the link in the top right corner right about now. So let's get started.
When many Americans think of Iran today, they think of nukes, the hostage crisis,
Sure,
flag
sure.
burnings. In 1979, a theocratic Islamic regime took control in Iran after overthrowing their autocratic Shah, or king, Reza
Yes.
Shah Pahlavi. However, the Iran we see
The
today
second one in
was
line.
just one of the many paths the nation could have went on. In an alternate timeline, Iran could have been much different. Yet this depends on just which events would have been changed. Before we talk about how things could have been different, we need to explore the recent history of Iran.
What it is, yeah.
Two major revolutions in the 20th century changed Iran drastically. The 1953 coup, which was backed by the US and UK against the democratic Iranian government.
Yep.
This resulted in the
happened.
Western-friendly Shah taking full control of his country, making Iran
Churchill
an
was apparently involved in that.
modernized state. The second was the Islamic Revolution of 1979. After decades of rule, there was a growing disconnect between the population and the Shah. His government cracked down on political opponents.
Okay, calling it a disconnect is kind of a minimizing the damage, because frankly, if you were not a royalist, you were not counted. The king technically ostracized himself. He went against the democratic populace, the clergy, the people or traders or those controlled the market. Everyone at some point was at least against him at some level at least. Not to mention that he was a anti-socialist, anti-communist. He was technically elected by the Western powers to fight against the Soviets. So yeah, not many political parties were remaining in his prime of the power. And usually, yes, by military actions and enforcements, he cracked down on the opposition. Not unlike today. Let's keep going.
Eventually, religious conservatives and some social liberals had enough, and the
Yeah,
Shah was ousted,
exactly.
bringing in a religious cleric, Ayatollah Khomeini, who ruled the nation as a
The pronunciations are just perfect. Not banging onto them, it's a hard word, not gonna lie. At least for the foreigners. It's permissible, it's not wrong. But don't get angry if someone mistakes or corrects you. Let's keep going.
anti-Western Islamic theocracy. For the next 3 decades, Iran would be a rogue state, its people bitter from the 1953 US coup, which brought in a dictator. The nation would fight in a brutal 7-year war against Saddam Hussein, which resulted
8
in
years of holy
stalemate.
defense, yeah.
As the Ayatollah died, Iran slowly began
Not
modernizing again.
Toyatollah.
However, social liberties are still extremely oppressive. Since this history is so complicated, this video will be split into 2 scenarios. 1, what if the 1953 coup never happened? And 2,
Going back,
what if
alright.
the Islamic Revolution never happened? Okay,
alright, yeah.
What if the
Let me make some assumptions. Any one of these could go. It is just assumptions. In the 53 coup, I would say the bigger chance would be split between the Democratic or the Socialist Party. One of these two. Communists had a big scene there, could absolutely go for the power. Democratic institutions were pretty strong there, or at least had a really good foot to start on. So the alternative would have been a very egalitarian democracy. Royalists were also big, but this is at the point you are arguing that the coup didn't happen, so they didn't come to power, I believe. Or at least I'm assuming it's going to. In the Islamic Republic, there was also a lot of communist leanings. Some of those cells even fought against Iran in the Iran-Iraq War. Namely, what they felt was that they were never going to get the country that they wanted in the revolution, so there was no point fighting for it, per se. Royalists wouldn't really be in the second one because by the second act, or the 1979 revolution, they were technically out of power. The more the century progressed, the less the power of the kings went, especially concerning that the first Pahlavi was inching towards fascism, and it was arguably at the prime of its time, either through social justice or means for progressiveness of the people, social mobility and all that, even though right after so many different bad things happened. So let's keep going.
1953 coup never happened. Well, what exactly caused the coup? Before 1953, Iran was a constitutional monarchy. The Shah was still the head of state,
exactly.
However, parliament controlled the government. The main player in Iran's government was Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. Mosaddegh wished for a secular, democratic Iran.
Not gonna say anything.
In control of themselves. How would they control themselves? Oil. Who controlled the oil? The British. Because empire.
Yeah.
The UK, under the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, had control of Iran's oil supply. The profits mostly went to Britain, while Iran was left with very little.
Exactly.
Mosaddegh saw this as unfair and
it was called, I think, the 16% agreement, because Iran was supposedly going to only take 16% of the profit, while 84% was given to the British. Yet even though that agreement was signed, there is almost no evidence that supports that anywhere in these trade agreements any money actually exchanged hands. So even if they did, they most likely kind of bribed the king or something, at least when he was still in power, and our parliament or Congress had no power to control it, you know? And yes, the nationalization of oil was something very big that kicked off all these events, actually. Let's keep going.
Believed the oil inside Iran to be rightfully Iranian, so he championed nationalizing the country's oil.
How radical of him, right?
Workers were expelled, Iran began to get the profits from their own resources, and Britain was not happy at all. At first, Britain ran to the US, wishing to overthrow Mossaddegh's government and get back that oil.
Yeah.
America, however, cared very little about Britain's imperial problems and said no. Secretly even, the US empathized with Iran. This all changed when Eisenhower came into office. The UK was
called him a socialist, exactly.
Mossaddegh sympathized with communists. Mossaddegh actually didn't sympathize with communists, they sympathized with him.
Even though he himself hated socialists,
America was brought into anti-commie mode. Thus, the US and UK funded a coup which toppled the Democratic
called us the axis of evil, might as well.
And all the plans of nationalized oil. The extremely Western-friendly Shah, Reza Shah Pahlavi, was brought into full power. Iran transformed into an autocratic monarchy.
Exactly.
The Shah allowed the UK
the loyalists
back in. In a twist of irony, America, fearing communism, swung its big ol' freedom stick and hit the innocent young Persian democracy. Now, what if this coup never happened? What would change? Well, here's an alternate timeline. The UK
Who would be in power?
American help in overthrowing the Iranian government. In this alternate timeline, Eisenhower simply says no. The US convinces Britain to double their production elsewhere to make up for losses. By doing this, the Mossaddegh democratic government is able to control themselves. This
going way of democracy,
the Iranian economy and the wealth of the people. Mossaddegh believed that the oil wealth should go to helping average citizens. So projects are used to benefit the population. By doing this, he cements himself as a hero for Iran. It's hard to predict how the future of this government would be, yet one thing is for certain. With the oil revenue, this alternate Iran is able to boost their own economy and general welfare.
Yeah,
This
a
Iran
very
has
big
sour
problem at the
relations with
time.
Britain for a few decades, but eventually they mend ties. If Iran stayed on the path of this democracy, it would be a secular power in the Middle East today. Now, moving on to the
If
second
only.
independent scenario, what if the Islamic Revolution never happened? Well,
This is
what
coming
exactly
after,
caused the
yeah.
Islamic Revolution? The Shah, who had been in absolute power for over 20 years, had grown very unpopular with most Iranians.
Yeah,
This was
after
because
the
of two things:
coup and all
his
that.
rapid progressive movements, as well as a brutal
So-called.
crackdown on political opponents, using his secret police to silence any critics. The Shah...
Okay, I'm sorry I had to pause that. There is this technical, well, I would like to say it's a myth, the so-called progressiveness of him. It is such a double standard to take, at least in my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, just maybe listen to some of the points I'm trying to make. They call him progressive because of his so-called white revolution, which didn't really work. Also, the fact that he banned hijabs altogether. He wanted a very westernized society, which, surprise, surprise, fed into the anti-Western worldview that we have even today. So definitely failed where he intended for it to go. And I would argue the king of a country should maybe know better. And the fact that he didn't, maybe he shouldn't be called progressive. Just because I mentioned it in the first few minutes of the video, he did ostracize himself. He went against the clergy, against people of the market, against farmers and tradesmen, which also that was where most of these communist ideas were brewing. Something he was fighting against, right? I remember one of the so-called mottos for one of the communist parties was that Iran is not just Tehran. There was unimaginable amounts of wealth just being poured into some of these very big cities, but almost every other part of the rural country was left to fend for itself. The only people that were doing good were the royalists, also called the loyalists. You could actually see this in a lot of our old movies. Movies created in those era all had like this sad, monotone feel of always talking about poverty, how their hopes and dreams is to go towards the cities, maybe buy a house. That was their dream. That was the entire point. Sure, they were progressive, but maybe not for the right reasons. It only benefited their class of people. That's how in our history we have unimaginable documented poverty, unaided provinces and cities in need of help. Lots of those cities didn't have access to clean water or electricity, something which, to their credit, sadly, the current government actually helped, gave a lot of voice to the more rural parts of the country, in which they are thankful for, because this might be the only government that actually cared for them, did stuff that they actually saw, and they show their support by standing behind them politically. So yeah, this guy was not progressive, and as far as progressive kings go, he was on nowhere near the level of his father. He genuinely pushed back some of the intellectual programs as well, like limiting the number of students that were going abroad for studies and all that. His father was always expanding it, yet he didn't, and he was an autocrat. First chance he got to silence people, he did. Not to mention the West actually did play favoritism in this, but even newspapers like New York Times, they used to place this guy's face, show him as this calm, collected, very progressive king, while in another article they would have Mossadegh's face. Never looked good on camera. Nosferatu looking. And then they called him a jester-like figure, someone no one takes seriously or should not be head of any political debate or something. They were undermining the guy that was advocating for democracy against this autocratic ruler. Let's keep going.
Shah wished to rapidly improve Iran, heavily influenced by secular European ideals. He wanted to use his rule to create a modern, westernized nation, even telling his neighbor, the conservative Saudis, to let their women wear miniskirts and have discos. Part of this plan was his White Revolution, a combination of land reforms, privatization, and educational improvements. The land reforms weren't much of a success and disenfranchised farmers. Education reached many new people across the country. The Shah allowed foreign companies to invest
not as much as should have, but yeah,
factories.
some.
However, the Shah also created a wealth gap. The royal family grew wealthy off of the oil reserves, while money rarely went to normal citizens.
Exactly.
The White Revolution, though, also pushed for women's rights, and by doing this, created many enemies in the predominantly Muslim population, one of which was a cleric called Ayatollah Khomeini. Khomeini was an open critic of the Shah, seeing him as a puppet to the West, and despised his reforms.
Sure,
After insulting
yeah.
the Shah, Khomeini was put under house arrest,
Then
eventually
exiled.
sent into exile.
Yeah.
Over the years, the flames of revolution grew as Islamists and secular opposition grew against the Shah. Protests
Everyone
erupted
hated
in
him, you know?
1978. The
He
Shah
united
wished to
everyone
negotiate
against
with the
him.
protesters and decided to lift restrictions on press and stop corruption. This calmed them until a massive terrorist attack caused by Islamists but blamed on the Shah reignited rebellion. Protests grew, got violent, more.
There are lots of conspiracy theories that tell others that the only bad activity in all of this revolution was just the Islamists doing it, then naming the royalists as the guys that did it, like pushing the blame to them. For that, I would refer you to the Cinema Rex incident, which everyone believed was done by the order of the Shah, but then the Islamists did that and blamed the Shah for it. So yeah, a lot of blame game going, not much of evidence going for each or any of the parties. Oh god, there are actually so many conspiracy theories. I'm not gonna even get to it. The picture that he showed was the Cinema Rex incident. Let's keep going.
Died until eventually the economy came to fall apart. The Shah's health began to fail him, and Khomeini's influence grew. Eventually, the Shah left, and Khomeini returned. After some infighting, the monarchy collapsed, and the 2,500-year-old Persian Age of Dynasties ended. Khomeini implemented his idea of an Islamic state and turned Iran into a theocracy. The government went from a secular, westernized but censoring regime to an Islamic anti-Western censoring regime. What if the Islamic Revolution never happened? The revolution was a reaction to the Shah's Western policies.
That is
Many
true,
in
very.
Iranian society believed the Shah was attacking Islam and their culture. So for the Shah to keep control, he would have to...
As someone who's an atheist, I don't have a dog in this fight, but yet I see that the majority of people are Muslims. So outright saying, I don't want any of you or you should change because of me is not a healthy relationship to have with your so-called constituents at this point. Even today, 95% of Iran is at least Muslim or Muslim born. So that message has way more repercussions that you would believe it would have. The talk even then was about like freedom of religion. It became an Islamic republic. Well, it is currently not Islamic nor republic, but yet freedom of religion is not forcing someone to take away their hijab or forcing someone to put one on. That's just bigotry on each side of the coin, you know what I mean? Also, the unimaginable amount of wealth that would have gone through the major cities while keeping a lot of the rural areas poor made a lot of enemies for the Shah, especially since a lot of them were farmers, people working at pastures, and the land reforms did not help either. Also, there is a step that he, maybe for the sake of at least time, did not mention. The West really supported the Khomeini endeavor, by the way. He was in Saddam's Iraq, which was friendly to the Western world at the time, then went to France, helped the revolution throughout the years in there, and when the question became whether Iran would be a democracy with maybe some religious leanings or a socialist party, the West definitely tended to the Islamic way of viewing things and supported him because they would have rather not seeing a communist Iran. Let's keep going.
Lessen the speed of modernization. Change could come, it would just be gradual. Khomeini would have had to have died before he became an influential leader. Even if this resentment grew against the Shah, Khomeini fanned the flames drastically. His involvement sped up revolution.
Cassette tapes he would send to the Iranian public.
Doesn't have such an important leader to spearhead it. If the Shah never fell, Iran would have continued on its modernizing path. International businesses and factories invest in the country, much like we do today in China. Optimistically, the wealth gap could improve, yet this is up to your own opinion. Reza Shah Pahlavi would die near the same time as in our timeline.
He died of cancer, I think.
Reza Pahlavi to take his place as king. Iran would stay allies with the Americans, being friends in the coming decades. In our timeline, the revolution in Iran allowed Saddam to invade the country. In the end, it resulted in a stalemate which prompted Iraq to invade Kuwait. In this alternate timeline, the Persian Gulf War never occurs because the Iran-Iraq War never occurs because the Islamic
The
Revolution
real Gulf
never
War,
occurs.
yeah.
In the 21st
All
century,
was a reaction.
Iran would be a key ally for both bases and troops in the war on terror. In a 9/11-like event by Al-Qaeda, Iran would invade Afghanistan alongside the Western nations.
Sure.
In this alternate timeline,
that would be a believable cause. Not to mention, they actually did. Iran kind of was also very involved in the Northern Alliance against the Taliban, because even then, Iran and Taliban don't really see eye to eye. Each considers the other one is schism in faith. And when America, I think, invaded Afghanistan for the first time, Iran's government actually extended a helping hand. And I think just after that, Bushy Boy George went on TV and called us the axis of evil. Thanks for that. And that was when our cooperation with Afghanistan died. The more you know. Let's keep going.
Iran has nuclear weapons. In our timeline during the 1950s,
mostly, yeah.
Iran began a nuclear program.
They did give us
the,
the first, I think, nuclear plant.
For peace. If the Islamic Revolution never happened, the Shah's government would be armed with nuclear weapons today. In this alternate timeline, Iran would be an industrial nation, modernized much like China and westernized much like Japan. It's difficult to predict if the government would be less corrupt and how Persian society would change in the 21st century. These are simply predictions and not 100%
assumptions,
conclusions.
Completely fair.
Interesting to theorize. The revolutions in Iran drastically changed how the nation could have been. The result of an oil dispute brought the country down the path of bitterness and isolation.
Yep.
Had the 1953 revolution not taken place, there certainly never would have been an Islamic theocracy. It's strange to think that one of America's greatest adversaries today could have easily been one of their greatest friends.
Was their
best friend. What do you think would have happened had the 1953 coup or Islamic Revolution never happened? Say in the comments. Like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.
Nice video. Very, very nice video. Oh wait, 20 seconds, let's see. Yeah, seems like nothing's there. Honestly, another great video by Cody. He did do his research and were good in assumptions at least. Make sure to check out his channel. I also have his second channel in the description below. He does pretty cool stuff. His assumptions were rightfully what would happen if the coup didn't happen, or if the outcome of the coup was different. Just needed some fine-tuning, maybe just a bit more information, which I hope I was able to provide at least. Still, none of it makes us any further than the fact that the general population still currently and today supports this Islamic version of a republic, with a very, very just convoluted and Kafkaesque political party system, oversight system, and the fact clergy work in every single part of those doesn't help the fact, which by the way, my problem with this government doesn't start with just the politics, but it's just a big one, you know? They silence journalists so much that we're like always in the bottom 5 in journalist and press freedom, which you need to let that sink in for a really good minute. We don't know about the stuff that is wrong because we are not looking for them, which we absolutely need. Also, freedom of political parties is the only way forward, in my opinion at least, which is like the first step to a peaceful conclusion, to a reform, rather than a violent civil war ending with third parties and vacuums of power, which literally is what the 1979 revolution was in the first place, overthrowing the authoritarian regime and substituting maybe something better. We didn't get it, but we were hoping for it, you know? Anyway, I ranted on enough. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you all next week. Bye.